Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jeff Rumberg. I'm a managing partner with MetricNet, and I will be your host for today's webcast on Service Desk Best Practices. I want to welcome all of you to MetricNet's first webcast of 2014, and thank you for participating in our webcast today. Before we get started, I have just a few administrative announcements to make. During the presentation, all of you will be in listen-only mode. However, if you have any questions during the webcast, you can type them in the dialog box that appears in the lower right corner of your screen, and I will pause once during the presentation to answer questions. Additionally, I will remain on the webcast at the conclusion of the presentation to answer any final questions that you might have or that I did not get to during the first Q&A break. This webcast usually lasts about 90 minutes. So for those who have other commitments later in the day, I should be wrapped up by about 3:30 p.m. or so Eastern Time in the United States. Now, I see that quite a few of our existing clients have joined us on the webcast today, and I want to thank you for that. For those who are not familiar with MetricNet, let me give you just a brief introduction. MetricNet's core business is benchmarking. We perform benchmarks for a variety of industries and functional areas. My role in the company is to manage the service desk, desktop support, and call center benchmarks for MetricNet. The work we do for service desks worldwide spans the gambit, from benchmarking and best practice assessments to consolidation studies and outsourcing analyses. Typically, the service desks that we work with are looking to optimize their performance, and we help them achieve that objective through benchmarking. Now, for those who have not been to our new website yet, I would encourage you to go and take a look around at MetricNet.com. One of the unique features of the website is that we offer a free membership that gives you unlimited access to all of our content. This includes our metric of the month, our webcast recordings, white papers, and presentations. All you have to do is complete a short form, and you will be enrolled as a free member. Each time you visit our website thereafter, you can go directly to our resource library to access all of our online content absolutely free of charge. Now, since the question of how to benchmark comes up in every webcast we conduct, I'll preempt that question right now and give you just a brief overview of MetricNet's benchmarking lineup. There are three ways that you can complete a benchmark with MetricNet. First, we have what are called peer group benchmarks that compare your service desk or call center or desktop support group to that of a unique peer group. These are our custom benchmarks, and they're very comprehensive in scope. The peer groups are selected from our benchmarking database based upon your service desk's scope and scale, complexity, and geography. For example, it's common to select a peer group from your geography and vertical industry, and to also ensure that there's comparability in the number of contacts handled, since service desks are scale sensitive. Secondly, if you're only interested in industry benchmarking data, you can download an industry benchmarking report directly from our website. Just go to MetricNet.com, click on the Shop selection in the upper navigation bar, and you will see our service desk, call center, and desktop support industry benchmarks that are available for download. And finally, for those do-it-yourselfers, you can purchase a benchmarking data file in Excel format and conduct your own benchmarking analysis. Now, regardless of how or when you choose to benchmark your organization, I want to encourage all of you to connect with MetricNet on social media. We're active on all of the major social media sites. We put out a steady stream of posts, tweets, articles, discussions, and presentations that are designed to enrich the community of IT service and support professionals and to provide you with tools, insights, and information that you can use to enhance your professional careers. Now, for those who would like to follow us on Twitter during the webcast, use hashtag MetricNetLive to participate and share your thoughts, key points, questions, or just follow along. Now, one final note before we get started. This is particularly important for those of you who wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. When you exit the webcast, a brief survey will pop up on your screen. Please be aware that only those who complete the survey will receive a copy of today's presentation. The survey provides us with valuable feedback on the webcast. It's only 3 questions long, and it takes about 15 seconds to complete. So if you do us that favor and answer the survey at the end of the webcast, I'd be very grateful to you. And in return for that courtesy, I'll send you a copy of today's presentation. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. And we've got 4 items on the agenda for today. We're going to cover the first 3 of those items, starting with a historical perspective and talking about some of the industry mega trends that are driving the industry best practices that I'll be presenting. Second section of today's presentation, and this is where we will spend most of our time, is on a model that MetricNet has developed, an empirical model based upon observation in the industry that addresses 4 key components of industry best practices, starting with IT service and support strategy, performance measurement, human resource management, and marketing, which is really about managing your internal message and making sure that you get credit for the good works that you're doing within your organizations. I'm going to wrap up with a call to action. I'm going to summarize what we've learned today and talk about concrete steps that you can take in the near term, in the next 30, 60, 90 days, to realize positive, measurable improvement within your service and support organizations. So let's go ahead and get started with our historical perspective. It's worth pointing out right up front that everything you see and hear today is based on empirical observation. It's based upon MetricNet having completed nearly 3,000 service and support benchmarks over the last 26 years. Now, as a result of those benchmarks, we have tracked more than 70 key performance indicators, everything from speed of answer and cost per contact to customer satisfaction and first contact resolution rate. And we've also identified more than 120 industry best practices. These best practices address everything from service and support strategy to performance measurement, human resource management, technology, process and procedure, and stakeholder communication. So what you're seeing today is not the result of some theoretical exercise. There's nothing academic about it. It is truly empirical. It reflects what we see in the industry and what is associated with those service and support organizations that consistently exceed customer expectations. Now, it's worth defining what a world-class service desk is before we get started, because I will use this terminology throughout the presentation. I will talk about world-class performance. I will talk about best practices. So let's look at our definition here. There's 4 components. The first part of being a world-class service desk is that you consistently exceed customer expectations. This results in high levels of customer satisfaction. And if you measure call quality, you would expect your call quality to be consistently high as well. Now, being high quality, having high customer satisfaction by itself is not enough. You also have to manage your costs very aggressively. So the second component of our world-class definition is this. You manage your cost at or below industry average levels. This means that your cost per contact is below average. But it also means that you minimize total cost of ownership by maximizing first-level resolution rates. We're going to talk about that quite a bit throughout today's presentation, the relationship between total cost of ownership in service and support and the metric FLR, first-level resolution rate. Now, the third and fourth components of our definition are a little bit more subjective. Third component is this. The service desk will follow industry best practices. Now, the good news is that these best practices are pretty well defined and documented now. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to go out and figure this stuff out through trial and error. And in fact, what we're presenting today is an abbreviated version of a 2-day seminar that we deliver on service desk best practices. We've simply just boiled it down as much as we can to a 90-minute presentation. The fourth component of our best practices presentation is this. Every transaction you engage in, whether it's a chat, responding to an email, a live voice call, getting back to a person who's left a voice message, for example, every transaction has to add value. And that creates a positive customer experience and also drives a positive view of IT overall. And I'll show you some data on those very 2 issues. Now, there's another way that we can define what it means to be a world-class service desk. Graphically, it looks like this. On this chart, we're showing 2 dimensions. The x-axis is cost per contact. The y-axis is quality as measured by customer satisfaction. Now, we put some data points on here. It's not a complete data dump. We don't have all 3,000 data points from our database on here, but we've taken some representative data points and we've placed them on this chart. And the first thing you'll notice is that there is a cause and effect relationship between cost and customer satisfaction. They're correlated, but more importantly, there's cause and effect. Now, some service desks are driven by the need to minimize their costs. When that's the case, your cost will drive your quality. That is, quality is the dependent variable dependent upon how much you can spend on your service and support organization. Now, in other organizations, they are driven by quality. They are trying to achieve a certain level of customer satisfaction or call quality or first contact resolution rate or service levels. And in that case, the quality will drive the cost. So depending upon whether you are cost-driven or predominantly quality driven, that depends upon what the cause-effect relationship is here. But there is an inextricable cause-effect relationship between cost and quality. Now, the second thing you'll notice is that it's a nonlinear relationship. And as quality increases, your costs will increase disproportionately. That's why the curve flattens out. That's nothing more than the diminishing returns that you find with almost any product or service. Whether you're purchasing a house, a car, an airline seat, or anything else, as the quality goes up, the price typically goes up, but price increases more quickly than quality, which is why these curves flatten out when you get to the upper right here, which says that at some point it probably doesn't make sense to pursue any further quality. So all these cliches from the 1980s and 1990s, such as quality is free, those really don't hold up. Quality is not free. Quality, in fact, is very, very expensive. And in this particular case, it doesn't make sense to pursue 0 defects or 100% quality because it would simply be too expensive. But the real point of this chart is to reinforce what I was just talking about. What does it mean to be world class? Well, what it means is that you take the limited resources you have, and everyone does have limited resources, whether it's dollars, technology, headcount, office space, or anything else, everyone is limited with their resources. The question is, are you taking those limited resources and deploying those in the most effective way? If you are, you will end up on this upper curve, what we call the world-class curve. If you're just an average performing service and support organization, you'll be down here. This is what we call the average performance curve. So being world-class is a relative concept. It's not about hitting a particular first contact resolution rate or customer satisfaction or cost per contact or speed of answer or call abandonment rate or any other metric. It is about deploying your resources as effectively as you possibly can. What that means is that there are service desks that are way down here at around $4 or $5 per inbound contact that still manage to eke out a pretty good level of customer satisfaction given that they are extremely constrained on resources. They are world-class because they are using their limited resources in the most effective way. There are other service desks that may be spending $100, even $200 or $300 per inbound contact. And if they achieve the best possible result with those resources, they are also considered to be world-class. Now, in this particular example, the latter service desk will have a better absolute performance than the first service desk. However, both of them are optimized, meaning that they are achieving the best result that they can with the resources they have. So it is possible to be very low cost and still be world-class. It is possible to be very high quality and also be world-class. By contrast, you can be very high quality and not be world-class. If you're not deploying your resources effectively, likewise you can be very low cost and not be world-class if you're frittering away your resources and not deploying those as effectively as you possibly can. Now, a couple more implications of this. If you're way out here on the right-hand side, what it says is that you can probably cut your costs pretty dramatically without impacting your without impacting your quality very much at all. By contrast, if you're way down here in the lower left, you can probably improve your quality quite a bit without increasing your cost very much, which is why most service desks tend to end up in this middle range here. They strike a reasonable balance between the cost of service delivered and the quality of service that they achieve. The real question is, are you using your resources as effectively as you possibly can? Are you optimized, which says that you can't get a better result than you have with the resources you have. The only way you can get higher quality is to push more resources into the function. If you were to reduce your cost, you would see a reduction in the quality of service delivered. So with that definition in mind, that brings us to our first polling question of the day. And the polling question has to do with what it means to be world-class. And the polling question is this: do you consider your service desk to be world-class? Do you consider your service desk to be world-class? Remember, there are 4 components of the definition. You're low cost, you're high quality, high customer satisfaction, you follow industry best practices, and you add value on every transaction. Okay, we're getting good participation here. While you're completing that survey, let me just thank all of you who joined us today. We've got people from 17 countries on today's webcast. Some of you are 12 hours diametrically opposed from where I am. It's 2:15 p.m. my time on the East Coast of the United States. Those of you who are dialing in from Japan and elsewhere at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. If you're in Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, countries like that, thank you so much for participating in our webcast today. Okay, most of you have voted now, so I'm going to go ahead and share the results of that poll with you. And here's what it says. 38% of you, based on our definition, do consider your service desks to be world-class. Other 53% say no. Now, that's a pretty good result. Generally, when we run this webcast, we get a ratio of about 60 to 25. 60% say no, 25% say yes. So this is the best result we've ever realized in doing this poll and in delivering this particular webcast. So for those of you who do believe that you are at world-class levels of performance based on the definition that I provided, kudos and congratulations to you. For those that aren't yet there, I want to encourage you to put into practice some of the key insights and principles that you learn in today's webcast, because what I'll be presenting over the next hour or so is really all you need in order to make the leap from your current level of performance to becoming a world-class service and support organization. Another 9% not applicable, presumably because you don't operate or own a service desk. You might be consultants or industry analysts, for example. Okay, interesting result. I'm going to go ahead and close that poll down, and then we're going to move on in our best practices presentation. So let's take a look at our model for industry best practices. This model contains 4 components. We're going to be looking at service and support strategy. We're going to look at performance measurement, human resource management, and then marketing, internal marketing, that is managing your message. Now, the 4 components of the model are reinforcing and synergistic. You will see that they are all arrayed around the central objective, not of customer satisfaction, but of customer enthusiasm. This is a critical point. We believe at MetricNet that customer satisfaction is a losing proposition. Satisfied customers don't necessarily want to do business with you. They're not necessarily going to propagate positive word-of-mouth referrals. They're not going to be loyal to your channel. However, enthusiastic customers are all of those things. They're loyal to your channel. They want to do business with you, and they propagate positive word-of-mouth referrals. Now, this model is synergistic in this respect. If you're just average or a little bit above average in all 4 of these components, you will be world-class. By contrast, you can be doing superbly well in 3 out of these 4 categories and performing below average in just 1 of the 4 categories, and you will not be a world-class service and support organization. And that is the beauty of synergy, is that it can work for you. All you have to do is be above average in each of these 4 areas, and we're going to explain how to do that to achieve world-class performance in IT service and support. And we're going to start our discussion by looking at service and support strategy. This is all about creating, unleashing, and leveraging the value that is inherent in service and support. Now, what we found, having practiced in this industry for more than a quarter of a century now, is that service desks tend to evolve through 3 stages. New support desks and those that have not evolved very far tend to operate in what we call the support paradigm. Those that are a little bit more advanced and evolved operate in what we call the growth stage or the investment stage. And those that advance the furthest are what we call strategic service and support organizations. Let me characterize each of these stages for you. Newer and less evolved service desks operate in the support stage. They tend to be very reactive. Oftentimes a chaotic environment prevails. And in this environment, oftentimes the call volume is continuously increasing. And what they're after is mere customer satisfaction. Oftentimes, these support stage service desks are beholden almost entirely to their service levels, things like speed of answer and call abandonment rate, not recognizing or not realizing that customers care a lot less about that than they do more important metrics like first contact resolution rate. Now, at some point, those that work in that environment get burned out, or they begin to realize that there must be a better way to do things than continuously reacting and fighting fires all day long, and they begin to make investments in training and tools and technology that enable them to begin to get out ahead of the customer needs and expectations. Oftentimes, they will establish a network of expert problem solvers to whom they can escalate tickets that they can't resolve at level 1. They will sometimes adopt automation technology, build a knowledge base. The call volume at this stage will sometimes begin to level off, all other things being equal, meaning that you're not acquiring new properties, you're not adding headcount in the organization, and things like that. So this growth stage represents a turning point, an inflection point in the evolution of a service and support organization, where the support stage service desks begin to make these investments that enable them to start becoming more preventive and more proactive in the way they deliver services to their end users. Now, those who are the most successful at making this evolution become what we call strategic stage service and support organizations. Now, the primary purpose of a strategic service desk is to make end users more productive and to drive a positive view of IT. Now, that might sound foreign to many organizations. You may be thinking that our goal is to keep the speed of answer down and to get questions answered quickly and to keep the call queue to a minimum. No, the uber purpose of a strategic stage service and support organization is to ultimately return productive hours to end users and to drive a very positive view of all of IT, not just service and support. And I'm going to show you some data on both of these as we get further into today's webcast. Now, in these strategic stage service and support organizations, they will anticipate user problems and take action to prevent their occurrence, things like root cause analysis, for example. A proactive mentality prevails, and oftentimes users are given tools to solve their own problems. It might be, for example, a user-enabled password reset tool, or it might be a portal that enables a user to go in and search for solutions for the problems that they encounter. But at this stage, the problem complexity does tend to increase, and as a result, the handle times get a little bit longer. And it's not unusual to find in a strategic stage service desk that the cost per contact is higher than it is for a growth stage or a support stage service desk, because what you've done is you've prevented all the easy stuff like password resets, or you've given the customers the ability to take care of the easy stuff like password resets and shrink wrap application type how-to questions, and what's left over is the more complex problem set, which has a longer handle time. That in turn drives a higher cost per inbound contact. But note here that one of the primary goals is not customer satisfaction, which again we believe is a losing proposition, but rather customer enthusiasm and the creation of value. Now, sadly, what we found in this industry is only about 8% of service and support organizations worldwide truly operate in this strategic, proactive, preventive paradigm. Another 31%, slightly less than a third, are in this transitional or growth stage, but nearly two-thirds, more than 60%, operate in this support stage, and that's unfortunate because when you're operating at that stage, it's very difficult to get the recognition that you need to improve the service and support organization, to get the funding that you need to make the transition to a transitional stage and ultimately a strategic stage service and support organization. Now, today's webcast, as much as anything else, is about making this transition from support to transition or growth to the strategic stage of service and support as quickly and as efficiently as you possibly can. We're going to lay out the roadmap for you. All you have to do is follow the guideposts. Now, as we get further into this, I do want to point something out. I call it the paradox of IT service and support. And the paradox is this: less than 5% of all IT spending is allocated to end user support. Now, that includes the service desk and desktop support. The vast majority of IT resources are spent on these other activities: application development, application maintenance, network operations, mainframe and mid-range computing, desktop computing, contract services like disaster recovery and other outsourced contract services. Now, unfortunately, when you're spending less than 5% of your IT resources on service and support, many erroneously assume that there's not a whole lot of upside in this. And the terminology, service and support, is a little bit unfortunate because support suggests that you're not part of the main event. It suggests that you're an ancillary function, somewhat less important than these other things over here, like apps development and maintenance, the NOC, the mainframe data center, and so on and so forth. The sad and unfortunate result is that a lot of support organizations are managed with the goal of minimizing costs, and that's why you see nearly two-thirds of service and support organizations operating in this support stage. The strategic support organizations, however, the most effective support organizations, focus not on minimizing their costs, but on maximizing their value. Now, there's three fundamental sources of value in service and support. The first one is shown and illustrated here on page 20. If we look at the cost of resolving a ticket at various levels of service and support in North America last year, 2012, to resolve a ticket at level 1, total fully loaded cost divided by total inbound ticket volume is about $22. Now, fully loaded cost includes the cost of all the agent salaries and benefits, contractor salaries and benefits, the supervisors, the team leads, the workforce schedulers, all the personnel, but it also includes the facilities expense, the travel, the training, the office supplies, the technology, the telephony, and so on and so forth. So if we look at the fully loaded cost divided by the inbound contact volume from all channels, chat, live voice, email, etc., it's about $22 per ticket. Now, if a ticket gets pushed out to desktop support, the cost of resolution, fully loaded cost, was about $62 in 2012. Now, these are additive. This is not a total of $62. This is $62 on top of the original $22. And if that ticket gets pushed out to some end level in IT, what we call level 3, like an apps group or a networking group, add another $85 on top of the 62 and or the 22. And if you have to get field support involved, somebody gets in a truck or a car and drives someplace, you're looking at, on average, about $200 per ticket. And when the vendor gets involved, you're looking at about $500 per ticket. So there's a cliche in this industry which has some truth to it. The cliche is this: get it done at level 1. There's real value because the more you resolve at level 1, and some people call this shift left. You've probably heard that terminology. In fact, if we take this chart and we rotate it 90 degrees to the right, you can see how a shift left would bring you from a $62 cost per ticket to a $22 cost per ticket, or from an $85 cost per ticket to a $62 cost per ticket. And if you go from level 1 to level 0, meaning user self-help, you go from $22 per ticket to the user helping themselves. There's no direct cost associated with that. And then you've even got level -1, which is that the user never has a problem to begin with, either because they've been trained well or because the design of the systems that they're using is such that they simply do not encounter problems that they would otherwise encounter. But the first source of value in a strategic service desk is maximizing level 1 resolution rate, recognizing that every time you push a ticket out to other levels of support, the cost increases fairly dramatically. And this is why first level resolution rate is such an important metric. It is different than FCR. Typically FLR, first level resolution rate, is greater than FCR. If you have, say, a 70% first contact resolution rate, it's not unusual to have an 80 or an 85% first level resolution rate. Because first level means it's resolved at level 1, but not necessarily on first contact. This is the first source of value, this TCO measure, first level resolution rate. And that brings us to our second polling question of the day. And that polling question has to do with first level resolution rate. Let me open the poll up, and I'll launch that for you. And the poll is this: do you track first level resolution on your service desk? And while you're completing that, give you 30 seconds to complete that, I just want to shout out to some of the people that have joined us on the webcast today. And I'm picking these names at random. Brian Webb, thanks for joining us. Edgar Cabrera, great to see you here. Jennifer Vizcarra, hope I pronounced that right. Great to see you here. Thanks for joining us. Larry Moriello, great to have you here. Melissa Bass, thanks for joining us today. Steve Vondrel, and Xavier Ruhad. Just grabbing some names at random. Want to thank you personally for joining us on our webcast today. Okay, most of you have voted on this, so I'm going to close the poll down and I'm going to show you what those results look like. 68% of you have or are tracking first level resolution rate. Another 26% of you are not tracking first level resolution rate, and then 6% not applicable, presumably because you're not affiliated with a service and support organization. Now that's a pretty good result. When we first started doing these webcasts a number of years ago, these results were reversed. In other words, we had roughly 2/3 saying no, they were not tracking first level resolution rate, 26% saying yes, they were tracking first level resolution rate. So this is a positive development. For those of you who are not tracking first level resolution rate, I would encourage you to start tracking that metric. It is a proxy for total cost of ownership, and it is an indication of how much value you are adding in this particular way. Remember, get it done at level 1 helps reduce total cost of ownership. It helps save money, reduce the cost of reduce total cost of ownership for service and support. Okay, interesting result. I'm going to go ahead and close that poll down, and we're going to move on now and look at the second source of leverage in a strategic service and support organization. Now let me explain this. It's kind of a complicated looking chart, but I think if you give me a minute here, you'll probably get the gist of it very, very quickly. We conducted a survey of 60 organizations worldwide. These organizations participated in a MetricNet service desk and desktop support benchmark, and we ranked them 1 through 60. And as you can imagine, the first place participant in that benchmark was happy. The 60th place participant in that benchmark was not very happy. But what we did is we divided them into quartiles. That is, the top 15 were in quartile number 1. The second group of 15 were in quartile number 2. The third group of 15 were in quartile number 3, and the fourth group, or the bottom group, was in the last quartile. We measured a number of metrics, but we put together a scorecard for each of the 60 companies where we looked at their customer satisfaction for the service desk, their first contact res rate for the service desk, and the mean time to resolve in hours for each ticket on the service desk. We did the same thing for desktop support. We looked at customer satisfaction, first contact resolution rate for incidents, not service requests, but for incidents, and then we looked at mean time to resolve. And we created a scorecard, and I'm going to show you how that scorecard is created in a few minutes here. And we put them in these quartiles. Now, we also did a time and motion study, and we had users within those organizations actually keep track of how much lost time there was when they had an incident related to the service desk, or excuse me, an incident related to IT that required either service desk support or desktop support. And what we found is that in those organizations, in the top quartile, on average, over the course of a year, because of various IT outages, because of problems with smartphones, for example, or printers, or desktop computers, or laptop computers, or tablet computers. In other words, your basic knowledge worker now has almost 3 devices that need to be supported. But if you're in a top quartile organization, meaning that service and support is in the top quartile, in a typical year, you lose about 17 hours of productive time. In some cases, there might be a workaround, like there's an app that's not working quite the way it should, but there's a workaround to it. You all know the drill. Sometimes there are workarounds, sometimes there are not. There are times that you can't get into the network and just can't do your job. There are other times where there's a kludgy process to get your job done, but it just takes a little bit more time. But based on this time and motion study, we found that those end users that worked in top quartile service support organizations lost about 17 productive hours a year. Now, if you're in the second quartile, on average, over the course of a year, if you're a knowledge worker, due to various IT-related problems and issues, you'd lose about 26 productive hours per year. And if you were in the third quartile, you'd lose about 37 productive hours per year. And if you're in the fourth quartile, you're losing about 47 productive hours a year. Now, think about this. The difference between the end users in an organization that is a top quartile performing service and support organization versus those that have the unfortunate experience of working in a company that is a fourth quartile performing service and support organization, the difference is about 30 productive hours per year. That is huge if you think about it. And what most service and support professionals don't recognize is that one of your primary responsibilities is to make end users more productive. But in most cases, the end users don't track how much more productive they are. This is the only study I'm aware of, done by MetricNet a couple of years ago, that actually looked at returned productive hours versus the performance of these service and support groups. So you're still losing 17 productive hours on average, even if you work in an organization that is a top quartile performing service and support group. But woe to those who work in a bottom quartile organization where service and support is not very good, because you're losing more than a week of productive time per year. Now, if you take the difference between the top and the fourth quartile, roughly 30 hours per year, and you multiply that by the number of people you've got in your company, the hundreds or the thousands or tens or hundreds of thousands of employees that you have, you can see that there's huge economic leverage here, meaning that the more effective you are in service and support, the more productive you will make your end users. That is the most significant economic ROI of service and support, and most organizations don't even recognize it. Let's say, for example, that there are 1,000 people that work in your organization, and you are a top quartile performer. You're saving roughly 30 hours versus the bottom quartile. 1,000 people times 30 hours, that's 30,000 hours. We all know that there's about 2,000 working hours per year, so that's the equivalent of 15 FTEs. 15 full-time equivalent headcount is what you are saving that organization by being a top quartile performer. So what I've shown on the upper part of this chart is just the graph of this data. The first quartile performers, these blue diamonds here, represent their performance. We show the productive hours lost per employee per year on the y-axis. The second quartile performers go a little bit higher. Third quartile performers more productive time lost, and the fourth quartile performers, you can see that the productive hours lost in a fourth quartile organization are significantly higher than they are for a top quartile performing organization. So many in the industry have suspected this for a long, long time, and there were a lot of cliches, or not so much cliches, but euphemisms around how service and support is a good thing because it makes the end users more productive and all of that, but we finally have quantified it, and we put together a study that shows that that isn't just a motherhood and apple pie argument. It is a true economic benefit provided by service and support. That is the second source of leverage in a strategic service and support organization. The third one is this, and it's a big one. This also was a survey conducted by MetricNet, this time a much larger number of companies, more than 1,000 worldwide. They were all large cap companies. You would recognize probably most of the names. We gave the end users in those companies a survey to complete. It was a multiple choice survey, and we asked them to give us their top 3 responses, which is why when you add these numbers up, you get more than 100%. But here was the stunning conclusion from surveying these more than 1,000 organizations worldwide. 84% of those surveyed said that the service desk was a significant factor driving their overall satisfaction with IT. The second most common answer, desktop support, 47% said desktop support is a significant factor contributing to my personal satisfaction with IT. Now keep in mind, we're not asking them about your satisfaction with service support, your satisfaction with the service desk, or with desktop support. No, we're asking them, how satisfied are you with all of IT in your organization, and what is driving that customer satisfaction? Now this is powerful, because what it says is that this 4% function, remember the data I showed you back here, less than 5% of IT spending allocated to service and support, this 4% line item in IT spending drives the vast majority of customer opinion for all of IT. Now this makes sense because this is where end users have their contact with IT. Most end users don't hang out in the NOC. They don't go to lunch with the guys from application development. They simply don't have that direct contact with IT. However, they do have periodic contact with service and support, either through the service desk or through desktop support. So it's only natural that the opinion that they have about all of IT is strongly influenced by their interactions with service and support. So for those of you who work in this industry, service and support is the gateway to IT for end users. And you have a special responsibility because you have an opportunity to influence, dramatically influence, I should say, the end user opinions about all of IT. Now, if I'm a CIO, Chief Information Officer, or a CTO, Chief Technology Officer, and I see this chart, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to invest not only headcount, dollars, and technology and service and support to make sure that that is the best service and support organization in the world, but I'm going to invest my personal time and energy. I'm going to go down there a couple times a week, and I'm going to talk to people in service and support and make sure I understand their needs and make sure that I give them everything they need to succeed. Because if they succeed, I succeed. If they fail, I fail. Service and support is a proxy for how good a job IT is doing and how good a job the leadership in IT is doing. If service and support looks weak and performs poorly, all of IT looks bad, and by proxy, so too does leadership of IT, the CIO, the CTO, directors, senior managers in IT. So I believe that the conclusion here is quite profound, and for those that are serious about driving a positive view of all of IT, look no further than service and support and making the investments, again, not just in headcount and tools, technology, and dollars, but also in your personal time and attention, the time that you spend on this activity to ensure that you are delivering the best possible service and support through these interfaces. We're going to move on now and shift gears a little bit and start talking about performance metrics. I'm going to show you a whole bunch of metrics here on page 25, and I want to caution you, this is not an all-inclusive list. There are literally hundreds of key performance indicators, but the 20-plus metrics that I've shown on this page are the most common that we see in this industry. We've got cost metrics like cost per ticket, cost per minute of handle time. First level resolution rate is a cost metric. Some people consider it a call handling metric, but I've shown you why it's a cost metric. It's a proxy for total cost of ownership. So first level resolution rate is an indication of how effective you are in terms of minimizing TCO. We've got quality metrics like customer satisfaction and call quality, and FCR, which is a quality metric. We've got various productivity, agent metrics, service level metrics, and call handling metrics. Now, this is a lot to deal with, and I'm going to give you a few. Shortcuts in a minute here, because too many service desks track too many metrics and spend too little time actually evaluating those metrics. Now, you've heard this expression before: if you're not measuring it, you're not managing it, and you've heard variations on that theme. You know, what gets measured gets treasured, for example, but there is a lot more to the story. The problem, and I've just alluded to it, is that most service desks collect a lot of data but don't do much with it. There's not much analysis. Now, if you're not analyzing the data, if you're not really slicing and dicing it and asking what it means, you're not going to gain much insight from it. But insight is what drives action. And so if you're not gaining any insight, you're probably not doing much with the data. But KPIs, performance metrics, are not there just to track and trend your performance. They're there to be used diagnostically. That is, identify strengths and weaknesses, use them as an early warning indicator of potential problems, and to address the weaknesses in the organization, to close the negative performance gaps. That's the real power of metrics. Tracking and trending your performance is about 5% of the value of metrics. The rest, the remainder of the value, is in the diagnostic potential and the capabilities that are offered by those metrics. So historically, what we see in the industry is that there's a lot of time spent on measurement, significantly less time spent on analysis, even less time spent action planning, and then action, where the rubber meets the road, not much going on there. But the value increases as you move up this pyramid here. And so what has emerged in the last 3 to 5 years is something very different than this historical approach. I call it the holistic approach, where the pyramid is upside down. There's not a lot of time spent on measurement, and I'm going to show you that's a shortcut I alluded to a moment ago. But there is a significant amount of time spent analyzing those metrics, and even more time spent developing action plans. And then action, where the rubber meets the road, this is where the real value of metrics comes to fruition. If you don't take action based on your metrics, if there is not managerial action informed by the metrics are pretty useless. They might be interesting, but if they're not driving you forward, if they're not allowing you to continuously improve, if they don't enable you to close negative performance gaps and perpetuate positive performance, they're kind of useless. And that's what the metrics part of our best practices discussion is all about today, is using key performance indicators diagnostically to continuously improve the quality of service that you deliver. So we're back again to that ugly chart that shows 20+ key performance indicators, and unfortunately too many service and support organizations do track all these and more in many cases. But it's time consuming, it's costly, there's a better way to do it. And when it comes to key performance indicators, less is more. What I'm showing on page 30 are the metrics that really matter, starting with cost per contact and customer satisfaction. These are what we call the foundation metrics. We call them foundation metrics because everything you do in service and support boils down to one of two things. You're either trying to contain your costs or reduce them, or you are trying to improve the quality of the customer experience as measured by customer satisfaction. Nothing else matters. And that's really true. I don't care if you're making a decision about training or technology or having a pizza bash on a Friday afternoon. If it doesn't have the long-term effect of reducing your cost or containing your costs or improving the quality of the customer experience as measured by customer satisfaction, it isn't worth doing. It's as simple as that. Now, this is a very liberating concept because your decisions viewed through that lens of cost and quality, asking yourself, will this project, this training, this new hire, this new practice that we're going to engage in, will it either reduce our cost or improve the quality of the customer experience? If the answer is no, or I don't know, then you just don't do it. Simple as that. If the answer is definitively yes, then you do it. Simple as that. All of the other metrics undergird and support these two foundation metrics, and you're going to see a diagram on that in about 10 minutes. So those are the foundation metrics. They are driven respectively by agent utilization, that's what drives your cost per contact, and first contact resolution, which drives your customer satisfaction. This is a labor-intensive function. Roughly 65% of your total cost is tied up in personnel. That includes both agents and non-agents, like supervisors, team leads, workforce schedulers, trainers, and the like. If you look at just agent salary and benefit, that's about 50%, but total headcount, salaries and benefits, is about 65%. This is a labor-intensive function. So any serious attempt to rein in costs or to be efficient has to look at human resource productivity as measured by agent utilization. So agent utilization drives cost per contact, and FCR, first contact resolution rate, drives customer satisfaction. You'll note that we don't have a service level metric on here. The reason is that service levels don't matter that much unless they become extreme. If you've got a 10-minute speed of answer, that's a problem. If you've got a 25% abandonment rate, that's a problem. But too often what we find in the industry is that service desks are trying to drive their speed of answer down to unreasonable levels. They're trying to drive their abandonment rate down to unreasonable levels, and all that does is drive up the cost, and it doesn't improve customer satisfaction at all. Now the next metric here is first level resolution rate. This is our proxy for total cost of ownership. That's why it's important to have that. Now agent job satisfaction, that's a curious metric. Why would we want to measure that? Why is that part of the short list of metrics that we care about? And the reason is that this is a bellwether metric that has a secondary effect on just about every other metric in service and support. High levels of agent job satisfaction are positively correlated with high levels of customer satisfaction. They are inversely correlated with handle time and cost per contact, meaning as agent job satisfaction goes up, handle time goes down, and cost per contact goes down. It's also negatively correlated with absenteeism and turnover, meaning as job satisfaction goes up, absenteeism goes down and turnover goes down. What's not to like about that? This metric has a ripple effect across the entire service and support organization. And what we tell all of our clients is, we don't care if you know how to, our manager clients that is, we don't care if you know how to answer the phone or not. We don't care if you know the difference between an ACD and an abandoned call. What we do care about is whether or not you manage your personnel in such a way that you maintain a high level of agent job satisfaction and hence maintain a high level of morale in the organization. Because if the morale is good in service and support, all these other metrics pretty much take care of themselves. Now, I'm not a Pollyanna, and I don't want to oversimplify this, but the reality is when we look at agent job satisfaction versus every other important metric in the service desk, agent job satisfaction is a secondary driver of all of those other metrics. It's an important metric, not just to manage or measure, but also to manage. And we'll talk about that further as we get deeper into our presentation here. The last metric, what we call an aggregate metric, is the balanced scorecard. I'm going to show you right now how to build a balanced scorecard. The first thing you do is you select the metrics you want to include in your scorecard. What I've taken here are what I consider to be 6 of the most important metrics for a service desk. We're looking at cost per contact, customer satisfaction, agent utilization, first contact res rate, job satisfaction, and ASA, which I'm not a big fan of average speed of answer, but since everyone in the world tracks it and everyone likes to quote their ASA and abandonment rate, I've included it in the scorecard. However, you'll note that I've overweighted cost and customer satisfaction, 25% each. The reason is that these are the foundation metrics. They are disproportionately more important than some of these others. Utilization drives cost, that gets 15% weighting. First contact resolution rate drives customer satisfaction, that gets a 15% weighting, and then job satisfaction and ASA get 10% each. Now, of course, these must add to 100%, and these represent our subjective judgment. You're welcome to build your own scorecard and pick whatever weights you want to. These represent our judgment and experience, having done this for a while. The next thing you would want to do is for a representative peer group, meaning other service desks that look like you in terms of scope and scale and complexity and geography, you'd want to get some benchmarking data and look at what the ranges are on each one of these metrics. Cost, customer satisfaction, utilization. You put the worst performance in this column here, third column from the left. You put the best performance in this column here, fourth column from the left, so you get the complete range from a representative benchmarking peer group. And then you would put your performance in the third column from the right. So your cost per contact, 2183, customer satisfaction, 77.2%, and so on. The next thing you do, and this is where we get into the calculation for the balanced scorecard, you're going to calculate a metric score. That is a score for each one of these 6 metrics. Here's the formula you use. You take the worst case and you subtract your actual performance. That becomes the numerator of our metric score. We divide that by the range, which is worst case minus best case. And that's going to give you a number between 0 and 100%. If you have a low number, as this company does here with customer satisfaction, 39.9%, it says that your performance was closer to the worst end of the spectrum than it was to the high end of the spectrum. If you get a high number, a strong number like they do here on speed of answer, it means their 60-second speed of answer was actually closer to the best case than it was to the worst case. So this interpolation formula essentially computes how far along the path you are from the worst case to the best case. A high score says you're closer to the best case. A low score says you're closer to the worst case. Now the last step here is we multiply each metric score by its weighting to come up with a balanced score for each of the metrics. And when we add all those together, we come up with one single score. It's going to be between 0 and 100%. You can never get past 100%. You can never get lower than 0%. Now, the first time you do this, you look at your score and you go, okay, well, 57%, 56%, what does that mean? Well, the first time you do it, it may not mean a whole lot. But if you do it month after month, that is, you update this monthly or quarterly, and the number is improving, that's good. It says that on balance, when we roll together cost, quality, productivity, call handling, agent metrics, and service level metrics, we normalize them, we roll them together, we create this aggregate measure like our letter grade for the month or our letter grade for the quarter. It tells you how you're doing at that particular point in time, and if the number goes up over time, that's a good thing. If the number goes down over time, that's not so good. You see, you've got a lot of moving parts in a service desk. And if you try and communicate, say, to a layperson, well, our cost was up last month, but so was customer satisfaction. Well, are you better off or worse off? Or our cost was down last month, but FCR was also down a little bit. Well, are you better off or are you worse off? And then when you start to combine even the 7 or 8 metrics I've shown on page 30, and you start talking about the different directions each metric is going, it's really difficult sometimes to answer the question, are we better off this month than we were last month? Are we better off this quarter than we were last quarter? And the balanced scorecard is a very elegant tool that enables you to answer that question. It allows you to compare to other service and support organizations, which is what I've shown here on page 32, 100 service desks. Here's the number we just computed, 55.6%. We just went through that calculation. The orange bar here represents their performance. Now, when we run this algorithm for literally hundreds of service desks worldwide, the average performance is only about 50%. And it's a nice bell-shaped curve. It's a normal distribution centered right over 50%, with tails running off to the right above 70% and tails running off to the left below 30%. Now, if you're at 60% or above, you're going to be in the top quartile. If you're between 50 and 60%, you're in the second quartile. Between 40 and 50, you're going to be in the third quartile. And below 40%, you're in the fourth quartile. So this is a great equalizer. It's a great normalizer. It's a way of creating a score on a level playing field versus other service and support organizations and comparing yourself. It's also a way to track and trend your performance, as I'm showing here on page 33. This is real data from a couple of years ago, a client of MetricNet's. They simply updated their scorecard every month. That's what these blue bars are, and you can see that over the course of the year, they managed to improve their performance pretty substantially. The purple background here represents the trailing 12-month average. So the balanced scorecard is a unique tool. It's a fairly simple tool, but it's a very elegant way of expressing your overall performance with one metric and then tracking and trending that performance over time and using that metric to see how you compare to other service desks. So for the remainder of the metrics, we've only talked about the balanced scorecard so far. I'm going to go through a real brief case study which will help explain how the other key performance indicators are correlated and connected with each other. So let me quickly define what benchmarking is. Most of you probably know what benchmarking is. In fact, I know a lot of you have actually done benchmarking, many of you with MetricNet. But it involves comparison. You compare your service desk performance to the performance of a comparable benchmarking peer group. Now, comparable means that they have to be comparable in terms of scope of service and scale, meaning volume, complexity, and geography. Now, if you want to learn more about service desk benchmarking, we've got a white paper that you can download from our website. But the comparison by itself is interesting but doesn't get you very far. What you really need is a diagnostic piece which enables you to, once you compare, if you find that there are some companies in your peer group that have a lower cost per contact or a higher customer satisfaction or a better first contact resolution rate, you want to be able to exploit that knowledge. You want to be able to understand how they are able to get a better result than you are, because once you understand that, you can selectively adopt and adapt those practices into your own organization to help you build a sustainable competitive advantage and ultimately become world-class. Now, any organization can achieve world-class performance given enough time. Any organization can improve given enough time. The question is, how long is it going to take you to become a world-class service and support organization? If you do it incrementally through trial and error, all the blood, sweat, and tears associated with that, you're looking at months, if not years. The value of benchmarking is that it allows you to build upon the proven best practices of the industry's superior performers and improve your performance not at an evolutionary pace, but rather at a revolutionary pace. That's the real value of benchmarking. Build upon the industry's proven best practices, leapfrog ahead of all the incrementalism, blood, sweat, and tears associated with that incremental improvement. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can build on those industry best practices and achieve world-class performance in the shortest possible time frame. Now, that brings us to our third polling question of the day. There are actually two polling questions in a row. Let me go ahead and open up the third polling question. The polling question is this: have you benchmarked your service desk within the past year? Have you benchmarked your service desk within the past year? Okay, we're getting good participation. We're already above 50%. Have you benchmarked within the past year? And while you're filling that out, just a few more names. Amy Hammond, thanks for joining us. Celine Margiotti, thank you for joining us. Darren Mason, glad you could join us today. Jeff Nolly, great to see you. Neil Stewart, glad you could make it today. Roberto Peralta, great to see you here. Thanks for joining us. Russ Diven, glad you can make it. Sean Moore, thanks for joining us. Stanford Sims, I think you've been on some of our webcasts before, so thank you for joining us again. Okay, we've got almost a 90% participation rate in that survey, so let me go ahead and close that poll down and show you what the results look like. Okay, 25% of you have benchmarked your service desk within the past year. Another 68% of you have not done this. Let me share a statistic with you. We've been doing this for a long time now. I mentioned more than 25 years, and we've completed almost 3,000 service desk benchmarks. And I can tell you that there is almost a one-to-one relationship between service desks that benchmark and service desks that have world-class performance. Now, you could ask chicken or egg, are they great because they benchmark, or do they benchmark because they're great? Well, some of both. Some service desks got to be great because they benchmark annually, and others are great because they benchmark annually. They sustain their greatness, if you will, through benchmarking. Now, benchmarking is not a terribly time-consuming or costly process. If you've not done it, if you haven't thought about doing it in the past, I would ask you to strongly consider benchmarking your service and support organization. It is the quickest, most efficient, most effective path to world-class performance. As I mentioned, it doesn't have to take a lot of time. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It is probably the single best investment that you can make in your service and support organization. So we have one final poll, and it's related to the one that you just completed. And the final poll of the day is this: do you plan to benchmark your service desk in the future? Do you plan to benchmark your service desk in the future? As I mentioned earlier, we've got people from 17 different countries. But we have all but, and I check these things before every webcast, we have all but one time zone represented on the call today. So again, for those of you, particularly those of you that are dialing in very early in the morning or very late at night, which would be the case if you're in the Middle East, some of you dialing in very late at night, and for those of you who are in Asia, Southeast Asia, dialing in very early in the morning, I want to thank you again for doing that. I really appreciate this. Okay. We've got about an 80% participation rate. If you'd like to weigh in on this, if you plan to benchmark your service desk in the future, you've got five choices, sorry. Yes in the next 90 days, yes in the next 6 months, yes in the next year, no, and then not applicable. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll down and share the results with you so you can see how everyone voted. And 19% of those that are on the call today, we've got several hundred on the call today, 19% are planning to do a service desk benchmark in the next 90 days, another 22% in the next 6 months, and 42% in the next year. Now, if we add that up, 42 and 22 is 64, and another 19 is going to get you to 83. 83% of you on this call today are planning to benchmark within the next year. That's a pretty good result. That's probably the best we've ever seen. And again, for those of you who are planning to do a benchmark this year, I want to encourage you to go through with that plan, to execute that plan, because you will find that it is probably the single best investment you can make in service and support, and it will dramatically accelerate your path to world-class performance. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close down that final poll of the day, and we're going to move on in our best practices discussion. And what I'm showing here on page 38 is some benchmarking data. And I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. The first things I look at, and this is, by the way, it's real data, but I want to caution you against comparing your own service and support data to what you see on this page, because the single most important success factor in benchmarking is to make sure that you do an apples-to-apples comparison. That is, you compare to service desks that look like you in scope and scale and complexity and geography. This service desk is likely to be very different than your service desk, and so the caveat is be very careful about comparing your own data to this. Now, when I look at cost per contact, here are the 6 different metric types listed over here. The KPIs listed in the second column from the left. Our clients' benchmarking data, and then for a peer group of roughly 40 service desks, you can see what the statistics look like, the average performance, the minimum, the median, and the maximum. You can see their cost is high. At $28.17 per contact, the peer group is at about $23 per contact. Okay, that's the first significant red flag. Their costs are high. What about customer satisfaction, the other foundation metric? At 63%, it is quite a bit below the peer group of 79%. So we got big issues here. High cost, low customer satisfaction. 2 pretty serious red flags. Their metrics are not where they need to be for the 2 most important metrics in service and support, customer satisfaction and cost per ticket or cost per contact. High cost, low customer satisfaction. Let's diagnose what's going on here. Let's start with the foundation metrics. Again, everything you do in service and support boils down to managing cost, managing customer satisfaction. Think about it this way. On a 2-dimensional chart where we've got cost per contact on the x-axis and customer satisfaction on the y-axis, I've shown 100 representative data points here. That's what these white diamonds are. Where you want to be is over on this right-hand curve here. These red diamonds here represent those service desks that have optimized their performance. Now, some of them have optimized at a very low cost and a customer satisfaction number that's a little bit above average. So we've got cost on the x-axis with lower cost on the right. That's somewhat counterintuitive. We've got customer satisfaction on the y-axis with higher quality moving up, which is what you would normally expect. This horizontal line going through the middle here is the average customer satisfaction for these 100 data points. The vertical line going through here represents the average cost per contact for these data points. You want to be in this upper right-hand quadrant where you are both efficient, low cost, and effective, high quality. Now, there are a lot of ways you can do that. You can be optimized on this curve right here. This particular service desk is extremely low cost, and their customer satisfaction is a little bit above average. This service desk is extremely high quality, but they're also, their cost is only a little bit below the peer group average. But this is the holy grail of service and support, is to be both efficient and effective, meaning both low cost and high customer satisfaction. If you're in this lower right quadrant, it says that your costs are low, but your quality is also low, and what you need to do over time is improve the quality of service that you're delivering. If you're in this upper left-hand quadrant, it says that your quality is high, but so too are your costs. And over time, you need to figure out ways to reduce your costs and get into this upper right-hand quadrant. For those that are in the lower left-hand quadrant, they are both high cost and low quality. They have the worst of all worlds, and they need to both reduce their cost and improve the quality of service going forward. So think about the cost versus quality trade-off and constantly be asking yourself, how can we contain or even reduce costs? How can we drive a higher quality customer interaction so that we can end up at least in this upper right quadrant, if not on this optimal curve here? Now, if we continue on with our cause and effect diagram here, and that's what we're building, is essentially the relationship between the most important key performance indicators. Agent utilization is the big driver of cost per contact. First contact resolution rate is the big driver of customer satisfaction. How do we know? Well, we look at our database. The blue diamonds here are data points, and the red line is a linear regression running through that data. And as agent utilization goes up, cost per contact goes down. That's not a surprise. This is a labor-intensive function. If you make the labor more productive, costs go down. The ratio here is about 1 to 2, meaning every 2 percentage point improvement in utilization yields a 1 percentage point reduction in cost. The reason is that your agent salaries and benefits make up only about half your total cost. So it takes a 2 percentage point improvement in utilization to get a 1 percentage point improvement in cost. What about utilization and how it's defined? We get asked this question every time we do this webcast. We look at inbound contact handle time multiplied by number of inbound contacts handled by an agent in a month. We add outbound contact handle time multiplied by number of outbound contacts handled by an agent in a month, and we divide that by the number of working minutes in a month, which is about 9,700 working minutes, in case you wanted to know that metric. We've provided an example in here on page 44 for how utilization would be calculated. It turns out that worldwide, agent utilization averages only about 50%. Now, people are often shocked to hear that. they're like, well, what does that mean? They're goofing off 50% of the time? No, it doesn't mean that at all. But after you take into account, or when you do take into account sick days, vacation days, training time, administrative time, PTO, paid time off holidays, for example, they're only working about 50% of the time. That's true of a lot of functions. Now, we don't back out sick days and vacation days and training time and administrative time and auxiliary time where they're logged in and there's no calls coming in, for example. We measure every service desk worldwide exactly the same way, and the average utilization is only about 50%. It ranges from a low of about 20% to a high of about 75%. But this is the correct way to calculate agent utilization. Many people mistake it for occupancy or schedule adherence, for example. And if you have it's possible to have an occupancy of 90 or 95% and a utilization of 10%. So occupancy, high occupancy does not necessarily mean high utilization. However, low occupancy will always result in low agent utilization. So you can have high occupancy, that is the agents are in their seats wearing their headsets, doing just what they're supposed to. But if you're overstaffed by 50 or 100%, they're not going to take that many calls in a day. And so their utilization is going to be low, even though the occupancy was high. Let's take a look at first contact resolution rate. Once again, blue diamonds are data points. Red line is a linear regression through the data. As FCR improves, so too does customer satisfaction. This is a way of saying that customers value quality, and this is what matters to them is first contact resolution rate. Here, the slope is about 1 to 1. That is, every 1 percentage point improvement in first contact resolution rate yields an approximate 1 percentage point improvement in customer satisfaction. Let's drill down further and look at how service levels impact agent utilization. If we look at average speed of answer, as the number goes down, the cost goes up. Why? Well, if you've ever worked in workforce scheduling, or even if you haven't worked in workforce scheduling, it's pretty intuitive. If you have to answer the phones more quickly, typically you're going to need to staff up to do that. If somebody tells me I need a 60-second speed of answer and I can do that with 20 FTEs, and then suddenly they say, oh, I changed my mind, we need a 20-second speed of answer, I'm going to need more than 20 FTEs to do that. I'm going to need 22 or 25 or maybe even 30, depending upon what the Erlang distribution looks like for the flow of calls into the service and support organization. So as the service level gets more aggressive, as average speed of answer goes down, cost per contact goes up because you have to staff up to meet that quicker service level. The same thing is true of abandonment rate. As the abandonment rate goes down, headcount has to go up to keep the abandoned calls down. Here's the real kicker, though. Too many people in this industry assume that you need a low abandonment rate and a low speed of answer in order to drive high customer satisfaction. But this data says just the opposite. You don't need an aggressive speed of answer to get a high customer satisfaction, and you don't need a super low abandonment rate to get high customer satisfaction. Now let me explain this x-axis here because it's not immediately obvious what I'm measuring. This is ASA, average speed of answer, divided by total handle time. So let's say your handle time is 10 minutes and your speed of answer is 1 minute. Your ASA as a percent of handle time would be 10%. Let's say your ASA is, or let's say your handle time is 5 minutes and your ASA is 1 minute. Well, then your ASA is going to be 20% of your total handle time. You see, customers understand how to interpret ASA in context of the total handle time. That's why when you call 411, that is information, I don't know if anybody calls 411 anymore, but we used to a long time ago, you expected a 1 or a 2 or a 3 second speed of answer. That's because the total transaction time is about 10 to 15 seconds. You're not going to wait a minute or even a half a minute for a quick transaction like that. By contrast, when you call the service desk, you oftentimes expect a 5, 10, 15, 20-minute handle time. You're okay waiting a minute. You might be okay waiting 5 minutes, particularly if you've got a speakerphone. And you can put the service desk on speakerphone and continue to work on your computer, assuming it's working, while you're waiting for the phone to be answered. The point is this. ASA is interpreted by end users in light of the total expected transaction time. And if your ASA is under 10% of your total handle time, you're fine. But you don't want a 5 or even a 2% or even a 5 or a 6% ASA as a percent of handle time, because look what happens. Your cost goes up. So there's a sweet spot here, which says that your ASA ought to be in the range of 8 to 10% of your total handle time, and your abandonment rate ought to be in the range of 7 to 8%. That sounds high. I realize that. A lot of you are going to say there's no way we could let our abandonment rate get above 5%. Well, if you've got the money to spend, by all means, feel free to do it. But just recognize that by pursuing low speeds of answer and low abandonment rates, you are driving up your costs and you are doing nothing for customer satisfaction. You see the y-axis here? customer satisfaction. It's flat when your ASA is less than 10% of your handle time, meaning that if you get more aggressive on ASA, customer doesn't care. They don't give you any points for it. It's only when your ASA gets significantly above 10% of handle time that customer sat starts to drop off. It's only when your abandonment rate gets significantly above 10% that customer satisfaction starts to drop off. Another way of saying this is that customers are willing to forgive you an occasional long speed of answer and an occasional abandoned call if they reach a competent source of support when they get through to the service desk. And that's what this chart is showing. They'll forgive a periodic service level breach, if you will, or service level blip. What they won't forgive is incompetence as measured by first contact resolution rate. So FCR trumps your service levels every day of the week. This is where you need to focus your time and attention. Training and tools, everything from knowledge management tools to remote diagnostic tools, tools like BombGuard, LogMeIn, and others that you've heard about and are aware of. Tools that enable you to maximize that first contact resolution rate help drive customer satisfaction. The idea that you can answer the phones more quickly and make the customers happy, or keep the abandonment rate down and make the customers happy, just isn't true. Let's move on now and look at how training hours impact first contact resolution rate. Again, blue diamonds are data points, red line is linear regression. As the number of new agent training hours goes up, so too does first contact resolution rate. So training is not just motherhood and apple pie. It actually can drive FCR, which, as we know, also drives customer satisfaction. If we look at annual agent training hours, as the number goes up, blue diamonds data points, as the number goes up, first contact resolution rate also improves. All these diamonds here, all these data points on the vertical axis, these are organizations that don't provide any ongoing training for their analysts or their agents. Let's take a look at agent job satisfaction and see how that impacts customer satisfaction and absenteeism and turnover. Remember, I spoke very early on in this presentation about the importance of agent job satisfaction as a bellwether metric. As agent satisfaction improves, so too does customer satisfaction. And it's not just a spurious correlation. It's a true cause-effect relationship. As agent satisfaction goes up, turnover goes down. Why would we care about that? Well, first reason is that this is a high turnover business. On average, in North America, last year, turnover was almost 40%, meaning that 40% of the people that started the year as a service desk agent or analyst or frontline person was gone by the end of the year. 40%. Now, that turnover ranges from a low of almost nothing, 1 or 2%, to a high of more than 100%. This is a high turnover job in part because it's a high burnout job. It's a difficult job to do. Now, we also care about it because turnover is costly. Every time we have to replace an agent in a service desk, the cost is about $10,000. The cost to find a person, recruit the person, train the person, and then when they start working, they're not immediately productive. They have to come down a learning curve. You add it all up, you're looking at about $10,000 to $12,000 per person in North America last year, the cost of losing an agent. Now, I realize that some turnover is inevitable. You can't stop it all. However, what you want to be doing is trying to minimize that turnover, keeping your good agents because they have that skill set, they have that experience, that expertise that you want to keep within the organization. You don't want to be spending $10,000 to $12,000 to replace a person every time they walk out the door. Let's take a look at training hours and how that impacts agent job satisfaction. Here's annual agent training hours versus agent job satisfaction. So there is a way to manage agent job satisfaction. We're going to discuss that in more detail in just a few minutes here. But training is one of the ways that you manage agent job satisfaction. As the number of training hours goes up, so too does agent job satisfaction. So we're now in a position to be able to put all this together, starting with our foundation metrics, which are driven respectively by agent utilization and first contact resolution rate, driven by these metrics. And ultimately, this is our cause-effect diagram. Look at the metrics that are in red. These are the ones that were on our short list. Cost per contact, customer satisfaction, foundation metrics driven by agent utilization and FCR. Here's our TCO metric, first level resolution rate. Here's agent job satisfaction. That's why they're in red. The only one we're not showing on here is the balanced scorecard. But now that we understand how the KPIs are interconnected and how they're interrelated to each other and which KPI drives which other KPI, remember this linkage. This is powerful stuff because this is really kind of a cheat sheet, if you will, for how you can achieve desired outcomes within your service and support organization. If you want to reduce your cost per contact, look first at agent utilization because it's usually a human resource productivity issue. If you're trying to drive a higher customer satisfaction, look first at first contact resolution rate and secondly at agent job satisfaction. So this diagram shows you the interconnectedness and the interrelationship of the most important key performance indicators on the service desk. And it's really a roadmap, if you will, for how to achieve desired outcomes. It gives you the levers you need to pull to achieve desired outcomes. So we're back now to our benchmarking data. High cost, low customer satisfaction, two big red flags. Let's diagnose what they mean. Remember, cost is driven by agent utilization, so let's take a look at that. Agent utilization at 46.7% using the formula I showed you a few pages back on page 43 compares to 53.1% at the peer group. Okay, well, there's a smoking gun. Low utilization is going to drive higher than average cost per contact. Well, why is the agent utilization low? Remember our cause-effect diagram? Let's look at service levels. Okay, 18-second speed of answer, 2.9% call abandonment rate, compares to a 45-second speed of answer for the peer group and an 8.1% abandonment rate for the peer group. Remember what I told you? You don't need these aggressive service levels. What is their handle time here? 12.41 minutes. Okay, 10% of that would be a little more than a minute, about a minute and 10 seconds. So what are they doing with an 18-second speed of answer? I asked them that question. Why do you have an 18-second speed of answer and a 3% abandonment rate? And their answer was this. The Chief Information Officer told us to keep ASA under 20 seconds and to keep the abandonment rate under 3%. Okay, that's a classic example of assuming that a low ASA and a low abandonment rate is going to drive customer satisfaction. It's not. So the short story here, the diagnosis was this. Look, you need to back off on that. You're overstaffed right now just to hit these service levels, which makes no sense. The good news, if I could call it that, is that you have 30% turnover per year. And what I would suggest that you do is as you attrit over the next 3 to 6 months, meaning as you experience turnover over the next 3 to 6 months, do not replace those agents. And what you'll see is that your service levels will drift up. That is, your ASA will get longer, your abandonment rate will get higher, but your cost per contact will go down because your utilization is going to go up. Okay, fairly simple diagnosis, and that's the real power of understanding these cause and effect diagrams for key performance indicators. So that was a real simple, I'm simplifying the story, but it really wasn't much more complex than that. What about customer satisfaction at 63%? We know that customer sat is driven primarily by first contact resolution rate. So when we look at that metric at 51.3%, it's way below the peer group average. We also know that FCR is a function of training hours. So when we look at this, we look at training hours, 36 initial training hours for new agents, 12 training hours for agents who have been on the job for a year or more. That compares to 79 initial training hours for the peer group and 34 annual training hours for the peer group. They simply weren't investing much time and energy in training. They were way below the peer group average. So here again, the diagnosis was pretty simple. Look, you need to provide more training for these agents, and specifically, you need to educate the agents on the importance of first contact resolution rate, because if you provide training and set a goal for first contact resolution rate and up your first contact resolution rate, you're going to see this number go up and you're going to see customer satisfaction go up. And that's exactly what happened over the next 180 days. They instituted specific training around FCR. They improved training for both new agents, which they didn't have a lot of because, remember, they were attriting. But they did increase the training for the annual agents. They bumped the number up to about 25 hours, which was still below the peer group. But they did achieve a 75% or just under 75%. It's around 74% first contact resolution rate within 6 months. That increased their customer satisfaction from 63% to just over 80%. So if you understand how the KPIs are connected and interrelated to each other, it's extremely powerful. It's a diagnostic roadmap for how to troubleshoot and address negative performance gaps within the service desk. Now, we're running a little bit short on time, so I'm going to skip this Q&A right now. However, I do want to emphasize that at the conclusion of the webcast, I'm going to stay on the Q&A as long as there are questions. And by the way, there's only about 10 or 12 minutes left in the webcast. But I will stay on as long as you all have questions. So if you do have questions, please type them in the dialog box that appears in the lower right corner of your screen, and I will answer those questions. Let's turn our attention now to human resource management, the third component of our best practices model. What I'm showing on page 63 is a little bit of a cheat sheet where I've listed some of the more common best practices around human resource management in the left-hand column. I've described them a little bit in the second column from the left. And this is not an all-inclusive list of HR best practices, but some of the better-known HR best practices. Now, in the upper right-hand corner, I've shown what I call the affected key performance indicators, like cost per contact, customer satisfaction, agent utilization, first call res rate, call quality, and whatnot. And you will find at the intersection of the column and the row there will be a cell. The cell will either be white or light blue or dark blue. Now, if the cell is dark blue, what it says is that there is a strong cause and effect relationship between the KPI and the best practice. If there's a light blue cell, it means that there is a weak cause and effect relationship between the KPI and the best practice. And if there's a white cell, it says that there's little or no cause effect relationship between the KPI and the best practice. So if I do a benchmark and I find that my utilization is low or my FCR is low, call quality is not good, handle time is too high, cost per call is high, what have you, I can look at this chart and gain some insight into which practices around human resource management might allow me to address this issue. So first call resolution rate, this is not rocket science, but training around the importance of FCR, establishing an FCR goal, how you achieve a higher first contact resolution rate can oftentimes improve that metric by as much as 10 or even 15 percentage points. Same thing with any other metric you look at here. Customer sat can also be improved through training. Call quality can be improved through coaching and feedback. In fact, most of you probably have coaching and feedback programs. You may be using Verint Witness or some other tool like that that enables you to record calls and then sit down with your agents once a month and go through their recorded calls and provide some feedback, which will improve the call quality, which of course is ultimately meant to improve the quality or the customer satisfaction as well. But this chart can be used to correlate KPIs with various best practices in human resource management. Now, if we go back to our diagram from a few pages back, you remember this cause and effect diagram for the KPIs. On this chart, I've highlighted those factors that drive agent job satisfaction. So when I spoke early on in our webcast today about the importance of managing agent job satisfaction, about being proactive in that regard, because ultimately the quality of service and support is largely driven by the level of agent job satisfaction. And this isn't something that just happens. Unfortunately, in most organizations, morale is low and agent job satisfaction is low, but it doesn't have to be that way. Through frequent and effective coaching, having a bona fide documented career path, and offering adequate high-quality training, you can manage agent job satisfaction. Let me show you some of the data here. For annual training hours, as the annual training hours improve, agent job satisfaction also improves. The blue diamonds are data points, the red line is a linear regression. The more annual training the agents get, the higher their job satisfaction goes. This chart shows two sets of data, one for agents who work in a support center that has a documented career path, and one for agents who work in a support center or in support centers that do not have a documented career path. So the blue diamonds are different service desks, all of whom have bona fide documented career paths. The fuchsia-colored squares are those service desks that do not have a career path. And you can see that when there's no career path, the average agent job satisfaction is about 72%. When there is a career path, the average agent job satisfaction is around 81%. So training is not just motherhood and apple pie. It really does drive higher FCRs, higher customer satisfaction, higher agent job satisfaction. Career pathing, same thing. It's not just platitudes. It really does help to drive higher levels of agent job satisfaction. Now, the scorecard that I introduced to you almost an hour ago now, that scorecard can also be repurposed and applied to individual agents that work in your service desk. And that's what I'm showing here. Now, keep in mind, this is mechanically exactly like the original scorecard that I presented to you, the scorecard for the entire service desk, only this scorecard is meant to be applied to each individual agent. So every individual agent would have their own scorecard. It looks at the number of contacts they handle in a month, your productivity metric. It looks at customer sat, assuming that you can relay customer satisfaction back to the individual agent that handled the ticket. It looks at utilization, FCR, and then we've got some subjective metrics down here like teamwork and initiative and mentoring. Now you can construct your own scorecard once you understand the mechanics. You can see that we've used these weightings here. And even for subjective metrics like teamwork and initiative and mentoring, we can quantify those. Let's put them on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is the worst performer and 5 is the best performer. In other words, you can quantify these things. Now, the value of this is that when you give feedback to an agent, say on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis, there's no ambiguity, there's no subjectivity in the way you deliver that feedback because it has all been quantified in this scorecard. This is powerful for the supervisor or manager that's delivering the feedback, and it's powerful for the agents that are accepting the feedback because they can see very quickly where they're doing well. This particular agent scored very well on teamwork and mentoring. They did not score well on customer satisfaction. They did not score so well on utilization. So this scorecard gives them a way of looking and seeing how they can improve and which areas they can improve in. This really objectifies the process of delivering feedback to the individual agents. Now, if you've not done this before, it's a little bit of a culture shock. I'll be the first to admit that when you implement something like this within a service and support organization. However, for those organizations that have stuck with this and have done it for at least a few months, over time, they really learn to embrace this, because it is such a valuable feedback mechanism. It is so critically important both for the agents because it points out exactly where they need to improve their performance, and for those that are delivering the feedback because it objectifies what is otherwise a very subjective process. Now, most of our clients go even further, and they will actually post these results on a monthly basis. Now, I understand why that might be controversial. You don't list anybody's name over here because this is not meant to embarrass anybody. You identify them by a number or some other indicator without identifying who that person is. However, by doing this, you let the agents know how they stack up relative to others in the group. If they're not performing well, they're either going to attrit out because they realize this is the wrong job for them, or they're going to get their act together and they're going to start improving their performance over time. So what I've shown on this chart is a 6-month trend for, it looks like 25 separate agents within a service and support organization. So agent number 27 ranked 17th during the month of September. During the month of August, their score was much lower. You can see that over the last 6 months, they scored only 27.6%. Some of the better performers were much, much higher than that. So this is a way of motivating them, helping them to understand how they stack up relative to others in service and support. And for those that simply aren't getting it, that are perhaps in the wrong job, that just don't belong there, this is oftentimes a way to sort of motivate them to attrit out and move on and find other opportunities for themselves. Once again, I'm cognizant of the fact that this is somewhat controversial in organizations. You don't necessarily have to post the scores, but I would encourage you to strongly consider putting together these scorecards for each individual agent that works in your service organization. Let's now look at the final section of our best practices model. We're going to be looking at marketing, which is about actively managing stakeholder perceptions. First thing I want to introduce to you here is a two-dimensional chart that shows the value delivered by the service desk on the x-axis, higher value on the right, lower value on the left, and the perception of that value on the y-axis. In other words, how do the end users, how do the executives in IT, how do other people within the company perceive service and support? They're two different things, and that's the first thing I want you to recognize, is that your value and the perception of the value you deliver are not the same thing. Now, if they were the same thing, the data points would all be on this horizontal, or in this diagonal line here. So if the value you deliver is low and the perception of the value is low, well, that's at least a fair perception. By contrast, if the value you deliver is high and the perception of that value is also high, that is also a fair perception. Too often, however, service desks end up in this lower right-hand corner. This is a common but very dangerous position. Why is it dangerous? And that's why it's red as opposed to green, which is, good. Red is bad. It's dangerous because decisions are based on perception, not reality. And if the perception is that you're not delivering value, that you're not doing a very good job, decisions are based on that perception. It might be a decision to reduce headcount, to not fund a project, to insource, to outsource. It could be a misguided, and by the way, we're neutral on that whole issue of insourcing versus outsourcing, but we believe that there's a right time and a place to do one or the other, to insource or to outsource based on the business case. The point is that the decisions in the organization are based on the perception of value, not the real value. And by the way, I've never seen a service desk end up in this upper left-hand corner here where the actual value is less than the perceived value. That just doesn't happen, and we all know why, which is that when end users have a negative experience with service and support, they tend to tell a lot of people. They might repeat that 5 or 10 or 15 times. By contrast, if they have a good experience, they don't tell anybody. So you get dinged when you don't do a good job, but you don't get much credit when you do a great job. And so you have to manage your image internally, otherwise you will slip into this lower right-hand corner where the value you're delivering might be very good, but the perception of value is not good. Now, moving to the right on this axis is all about what we've talked about so far today. This is about operational effectiveness. That is doing the things that enable you to deliver a high-quality service at a reasonable cost. What we're talking about now is a different dimension. We're talking about what I would call brand management. That is making sure that you get credit for the things that you're doing in this organization. Now, keep in mind, we're not talking about, you've heard the expression, putting lipstick on the pig. We're not talking about taking a poorly performing service desk and trying to make them look good. That's not what this is about at all. What we're trying to do is make sure that we close this gap between perception and reality, because that gap will work against you. I just mentioned the reason why, which is that decisions are based on perception, not reality. And the bigger this perception gap is, the more dangerous a position that you're in. So MetricNet has put together, we actually have a full-day workshop on this. I'm going to boil it down to about 2 minutes. We have a best practices model around how you manage your image. We call it the 5 W's model. First is identify the stakeholders, who. Second is, what are your messages? Third thing, how do you communicate and when do you communicate those messages? What are the channels you use, where and how? And then kind of a rhetorical question, why are we doing all this? But I do have an answer to the rhetorical question. In terms of timing, you want to contact end users as often and as frequently as you can. At new employee orientation, when they log into a session on the network, there should be a little pop-up that tells them how they can reach the service desk, what the hours of operation are, for example. When there's training, I'm not talking about service desk training, I'm talking about any IT-related training should have a module on the service desk. During the incident itself, letting them know, setting their expectations in terms of resolution time, and then at scheduled sessions, much like what we're doing right now. An increasing number of service desks that we work with are holding monthly or in some cases even weekly sessions where they deliver a short message, 15 minutes, a half hour, something like that, just to talk a little bit about what service and support is doing. Now, what about the messages? Well, there are a lot of things you need to communicate, including the services you offer, key initiatives you might have underway. Perhaps you're implementing a knowledge management tool or a remote diagnostic tool. What are your performance levels, good, bad, or ugly? Communicate those. FAQs. Do you have an FAQ site on your intranet that enables users to go there and solve common problems? And then when you're having successes, make sure you communicate those successes. What about the communication channels? Well, login messages when the user logs in. There should be a message there about how to reach service and support. Asset tags oftentimes have a phone number for service and support or a website that they can go to get support. Newsletters, quarterly or monthly. Reference guides, typically online, asset tags. Customer satisfaction surveys, and then user liaisons. These are people that work in various parts of the organization. They might be in sales or human resources or finance or accounting that agree to act as the eyes and the ears of service and support. In other words, they communicate back to you what their end users are thinking, and you communicate back to the end users through those user liaisons what service and support is doing. These are the key success factors in service desk image management. Now, you've heard this expression before, expectations not set or expectations not met. And world-class service desks, if anything, are nothing if not proactive, and they proactively manage expectations. Now, it was more than a dozen years ago that a client sent this comic to me, and it reads, "Delight customers, why can't we just satisfy them like we used to?" Well, very early on, one of the first slides I presented today was about the difference between customer satisfaction and customer enthusiasm, which is the same thing as customer delight. Because satisfied customers are not necessarily loyal customers. They don't necessarily want to do business with you, and they're not necessarily going to propagate positive word-of-mouth referrals. By contrast, delighted customers are all of those things. They're loyal, they want to do business with you, they propagate positive word-of-mouth referrals. And that matters because you are the gateway to IT for all end users. And the quality of service you deliver at this interface reverberates throughout the organization and has an enormous impact, not just on the perception of service and support, but indeed on the perception of all of information technology. There's huge leverage in this function, not just in your ability to drive the perception of IT, but also in your ability to minimize total cost of ownership and your ability to return productive hours to end users. So to bottom line the marketing summary, managing this gap between perception and reality is pretty straightforward. It doesn't take a lot of time, and it doesn't cost a lot of money, but it is critically important. What we found is that the success of your desk depends as much on your image as it does on your actual performance. That's pretty profound, because typically if you break down your budget and you think about how much time and money you might spend on managing your internal message, it's going to be way less than 5%. Yet it is as important as your actual performance. Now, the benefits of effective image management include customer loyalty, positive word-of-mouth referrals, credibility. The more cred you have, the more able you are to get things done. Positive image for IT overall, and high levels of customer satisfaction. So let's summarize what we've learned here today and talk about what you can do in the next 30, 60, 90 days to see some real positive benefits in your service and support organization. We've introduced a 4-part model that addresses IT service or service desk strategy, performance measurement, human resource management, and marketing, all arrayed around the central objective of customer enthusiasm. The first component of our model, the strategy component, is all about unlocking the value. I've just very quickly summarized for you the 3 sources of value. You minimize TCO by maximizing first-level resolution rate. You return productive hours to end users. I showed you the chart on that. And you drive a positive view of IT for all end users. So focus on adding value. Focus on exploiting and leveraging this value. Secondly, when it comes to key performance indicators, less is more. You only need a small number of KPIs. I outlined the 7 KPIs plus a balanced scorecard. You should be benchmarking annually, as I mentioned, one-to-one correspondence between those that benchmark and those that are world-class, and understand those key correlations on the most important metrics. When it comes to human resource management, training is not just motherhood and apple pie. It has a positive impact on the organization. Recognize as well that career pathing and coaching have a huge impact on agent job satisfaction, which has a secondary impact on every other metric in service and support. When it comes to marketing, perception and reality are not the same things. You have to manage the gap between those two. The service desk is the single biggest driver of perception, customer perception of all of IT, and it's critical to be able to communicate the value that you deliver for the organization. So when it comes to service desk best practices, the service desk now is being managed as a strategic asset within the enterprise, one that can reduce the overall cost of IT, dramatically improve the productivity of end users, you saw the data on that, and drive high levels of customer satisfaction, not just for the service desk, not just for desktop support, but for all of IT. Now, strategic service desks have a number of success factors in common. They are integral to IT overall. They're not some ancillary function. They're embedded in the IT value chain. They understand the economics of TCO, which is why they emphasize and maximize first-level resolution rate. They have active efforts to maximize FCR, which drives customer satisfaction, and FLR, which helps reduce total cost of ownership. They use performance metrics diagnostically. They benchmark once a year. They invest in training, coaching, and career pathing for their agents. They actively manage their internal message, recognizing that perception and reality are not one and the same, and they close that gap between perception and reality. And they aggressively promote and communicate the value delivered and generated by the service desk. Now going forward, well, before I get into that, let me just say that in a minute I'm going to get to the questions that are queued up, and it looks like there are a few of them, quite a few actually. And I'm going to stay on as long as I need to answer all of those questions. If you do have a question, please type it into the dialog box. But before I do that, let me just go through a few closing remarks. There's a number of things that you can do almost immediately to leverage some of the insights that you've gained here today. First, I want to encourage all of you to look around our website at MetricNet.com. One of the unique features of the website is that we do offer a free membership module that gives you unlimited access to all of our content, including our metric of the month, our webcast recordings, our white papers and presentations. All you have to do is complete a short form, and you'll be enrolled as a free member. And then every time you come back to our website, you can go directly to the resource library and access all of our online content absolutely free of charge. I would also suggest that you connect with us on social media, where we put out a steady stream of information that service and support professionals may find useful. We have 4 LinkedIn groups. We have a LinkedIn company page. We also have 4 Google Plus communities and a Google company page. We're pretty active on Facebook and Twitter, and we have a MetricNet YouTube channel. Now, in the copy of the presentation itself, I provided links to all of our social media pages and groups. Now, don't forget to register for our upcoming webcast. Next month, we're going to be looking at service desk KPIs. In March, we'll be looking at best practices in desktop support. And in April, looking at desktop support KPIs. And in May and June, looking at call center best practices and call center key performance indicators. Now, for those who are, or before I get to that, let me encourage you to browse through our resource library on MetricNet's website, where you'll find a number of white papers, presentations, and magazine articles on service desk benchmarking and industry best practices. And for those who are interested in benchmarking, there are at least 3 ways that you can complete a service desk, call center, or desktop support benchmark with MetricNet. First of all, we have our peer group benchmarks that compare your service desk, call center, or desktop support group to that of a unique peer group. These are our custom benchmarks. They're pretty comprehensive. The peer groups are selected from our benchmarking database based upon your criteria. For example, it's common to select a peer group from your geography and vertical industry. Secondly, if you're only interested in industry benchmarking data, you can download an industry benchmarking report directly from our website. Just go to MetricNet.com, click the shop selection in the upper navigation bar, and you'll see the industry benchmarks that are available for download. And then finally, for those do-it-yourselfers, you can purchase a benchmarking data file in Excel format and conduct your own benchmarking analysis. Now, you can reach MetricNet at this phone number in the United States, 703-992-7559. You can also reach us through our website or email us at info@metricnet.com. Now, for those who have time to stay on for a few more minutes, I will be answering any questions that you typed in during the webcast. And for those who must exit the webcast at this time, I want to thank you for attending the session. I hope you found it to be informative and insightful. Please don't forget to complete the brief survey that pops up when you exit the webcast. This is a requirement if you wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. Thank you once again. Let me take a look at the questions that we've got now. Okay. Okay, question from Mike. How do you measure lost hours per employee? What we did, Mike, in that part of the study, and this had to do with the productive hours that top-performing service and support organizations are able to return to their end users. I mentioned that it was an industrial engineering study, time and motion, where a representative cross-section of end users were equipped with stopwatches. And we asked them, each time they had an IT-related issue, to record how much time they thought they lost as a result of that. So let's say the network is down and you lose 2 productive hours. Okay, the stopwatch says 2 hours, you record that, you lost 2 hours. Let's say there's an application that you use and there's some workaround, it's not working quite the way it is. You have to manually input some data or manually create a report, and it takes you an extra hour, so you'd record that 1 hour. So by outfitting a cross-section of individuals in those 60 companies with stopwatches, we did this in conjunction with an IE firm, an industrial engineering firm, we were able to estimate the amount of lost productive hours per employee. And then we looked at those lost productive hours and we correlated it back to whether or not they had a top quartile service and support organization, a second, third, or fourth quartile service and support organization. So the way we determined the estimated lost productive hours was through the use of those stopwatches and the industrial engineering study. Okay, Donna has a question. What about reopen percent? Donna, there are some service desks that do measure the reopen percentage, but it's now a minority. It used to be a pretty common metric like 5-6 years ago, but it's not nearly as common anymore. And one of the reasons is that metrics like FLR and FCR have eclipsed the reopen rate, and the other practical problem is that the reopen rate is pretty hard to determine because let's say you close down a ticket and then a user calls back. Oftentimes it's difficult to ascertain whether or not the callback is the result of a new incident, new problem, new issue, or related to a ticket that has already been closed. Now, there are some cut-and-dried cases where a reopened ticket, is clearly related to, something that shouldn't have been closed. In other words, it wasn't fixed the first time. But in many cases, it's not as cut and dried. It's not as black and white. And so many organizations have said, look, it's not a very accurate metric anyway, so we're not going to track it. We're going to focus instead on first contact res rate and first level resolution rate. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not an important metric, and I don't want to dissuade you from tracking that metric, but it has lost significance in the last 5 to 6 years as service and support organizations begin to focus more on FLR and FCR. And if your first level and first contact resolution rates are good and they're accurate metrics, your reopen rate is going to be very small. Okay, question from Steve. Did you mention how customer enthusiasm as opposed to customer satisfaction can be measured? Yes, Steve, there's There are different approaches to this. You've probably heard of NPS, Net Promoter Score, which is a proxy for customer enthusiasm. There is no single metric called customer enthusiasm, but the Net Promoter Score probably comes closer to capturing customer enthusiasm than a pure customer sat survey does. So a Net Promoter Score, for those of you who, most of you are probably familiar with it, you would, customers, you would survey them on a scale of 1 to 10, and your 9s and 10s are promoters, your 7s and 8s are neutral, and then 6 and below are detractors. And you subtract your detractors from your promoters. So let's say 50 people give you a 9 and a 10, 50 people give you a 7, 8, and 100 people give you a 1 through 6. You would take 100, you would take 50, 50 minus 100, which is negative 50, divided by 100. So you would get a negative 50% on your Net Promoter Score. So Net Promoter Score ranges from negative 100% to positive 100%. If everyone's a promoter, you're going to get, 100% on Net Promoter. If everyone's a detractor, i.e. 1 through 6, it's going to be negative 100%. So the Net Promoter Score comes closest to capturing customer enthusiasm. Not that many service desks are tracking it yet. Only about 20% of service desks track Net Promoter Score. Those that do track it are also tracking customer satisfaction as a rule. But customer satisfaction tends to be the predominant quality metric that's tracked. Okay. Question from Joe. Sorry, I've seen a number of different formulas used for calculating FCR. What formula do you recommend? Well, there's two different types of FCR. There's gross FCR and there is net FCR. Gross FCR would be, let's say, for example, that you have 1,000 calls come into the service desk, 1,000 total calls, and 800 or 600 of them are resolved on first contact. So your gross FCR is 600 over 1,000. That's 60%. Now, net FCR is going to adjust the denominator, and it's going to say, wait a second, some of these calls coming in just can't be done at level 1. If it's a hardware break fix or it requires a desktop technician to go out to the side of the user, that can't be done at level 1, so why would that count against us? And that's a good point. So what you would do is carve that out of the denominator. So let's take our example further and say that 200 of the 1,000 calls that come in can't be resolved at level 1 because it requires a physical touch. Okay, then your denominator is 800 instead of 1,000, and your numerator is still 600. So in that case, you've got 600 over 800, which is 75%. So your net FCR is 75%. Your gross FCR was only 60%. And in terms of measuring FCR, what we recommend is that you embed a question in your customer satisfaction survey that asks the customer whether or not they got resolution to their incident, their request, their question on first contact. Because ultimately, if the customer says, yes, it was done on FCR, and if they say, no, it wasn't, no matter what you say, you can argue forever and a day and say, we did it on FCR, but if the customer says no, they're the ultimate arbiter. And if they say, no, it wasn't done on FCR. So our recommendation is that you embed a question in the customer satisfaction survey asking the customer if they got resolution on their very first contact. Okay. Next question, are we going to get a copy of the slide deck? The answer is yes. That's from John. John, just fill out the survey that should pop up when you exit GoToWebinar, and we'll send you a copy of today's presentation. Cedric, great to see you here. What is a standard formula for figuring cost per contact for a healthcare service desk? Cedric, it's the same formula that would be used for a service desk in any industry. The vertical market you're in, healthcare, doesn't matter if you're in healthcare, business services, heavy manufacturing, transportation, or anything else. The way you calculate cost per contact is going to be the same. And what we do is we look at total cost, which would include all your salaries and benefits for everyone who works in the service desk, not just the agents, but also the indirect personnel like your supervisors and your team leads, your workforce schedulers, your trainers, and so on. We would look at salaries and benefits for all the personnel. We'd look at your facilities expense. If you don't know what it is, usually HR or your facilities department can tell you what that is. We look at telecom. We look at technology expense. We look at travel, training, office supplies. We look at all the costs divided by the entire contact volume from all channels, voicemail, email, web chat, whatever it is. Total cost divided by total contact volume. That's how cost per contact is calculated, and it's the same in healthcare as it is in any other industry. Okay, question from Rudy. what's your take on the service desk owning an incident from cradle to grave? I'm in favor of that, Rudy. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to close every ticket, but it does mean that they have to chase some tickets, meaning that if a ticket's about to go out of service level or the service level is about to expire on a ticket, you got to call people. You got to chase down those tickets, and you got to call people at end level, in desktop support or elsewhere, and find out what's going on with that ticket. So I'm largely in favor of the service desk owning those tickets from beginning to end. It doesn't mean they have to close out every ticket, but it is important to have a ticket owner. And in my opinion, level 1 owning the ticket is better than ownership transferring with the ticket. Because if you transfer ownership with the ticket each time it moves around, goes to desktop support, goes to the NOC, goes to some other part of the organization, it's just too easy to slip through the cracks. So in general, we believe that level 1 owning the ticket is a good thing, but again, it doesn't necessarily mean that level 1 has to close the ticket. But they do have to have a ticket chasing function, if you will, where level 1 is constantly monitoring tickets that are still open and making sure that for tickets that have been escalated or transferred someplace else, that they are getting the proper level of attention. Okay, next question. Companies have, this is from Xavier, companies have different ways to calculate KPIs. How do you compare KPI when one company calculates abandonment rate with a 20-second or 30-second leeway and others don't? The 20 or 30-second leeway, to be blunt, is bogus. Anyone who gives themselves a leeway on a call abandonment rate is cheating, to be honest with you. An abandoned call is an abandoned call, whether it abandons in 1 second or 10 minutes. It's an abandoned call. Now, that's an easy one, Xavier, on abandonment rate. This whole leeway thing is just, it's a big joke. It's bogus. It shouldn't be done. Now, there are legitimate differences in the way companies track other metrics, in particular, agent utilization, occupancy, schedule adherence, and especially customer satisfaction. There's a lot of survey bias in the way different companies measure customer satisfaction. What's important is that within the organization that you track it consistently, month in, month out, quarter in, quarter out. We at MetricNet will define how we track each metric, and when we do a benchmark for an organization, we never ask them to give us a compound metric. For example, we never ask for cost per contact. We don't ask for utilization. We calculate those based on raw data. So we calculate utilization based on call handle time, based on head count, based on number of contacts. So we create those compound metrics ourselves. We do the math ourselves so that we know that everybody in our database is determined exactly the same way. But within any given organization, yes, there are differences in the way companies will calculate those metrics. The important thing is to do it consistently, month in, month out, even if it's incorrect, which a lot of them are. Just do it consistently, month in, month out. That way, at least the bias is the same month in, month out. But there is, particularly when it comes to customer satisfaction, as I mentioned, there's a lot of survey bias, which tends to swing the customer satisfaction scores upwardly higher than they really ought to be. Okay, next question. This is from Abhishek. Do the KPIs change depending if the billing is FTE based instead of call per ticket? That's a long discussion, Abhishek, but the short answer is yes, it does. There are different key performance indicators, and it sounds like you work for a BPO, a business process outsourcer. KPIs do look different depending upon how the billing works, and they'll look different from the vendor's perspective, assuming you work for a vendor or a BPO, and they will look different from the customer's perspective. It's a fairly lengthy discussion, though, so what I would encourage you to do is send me an email or give me a call, and I can tell you which metrics differ and why. Okay, next question is from David. Do you recommend surveying every customer at the conclusion of their contact or some subset? Every customer, no. That's overkill. You're going to over-survey, and there will be a negative backlash as a result of doing that. The average end user calls a service desk about twice a month. And if you're surveying them twice a month, that's not good. You are going to get some backlash as a result of that. We suggest surveying a person no more than once every 6 months. So what you need to be doing is sampling such that the general rule, David, in the industry is that you send out a survey for approximately every 10th or 20th customer. So every 10 customers, a survey gets emailed out. Every 20th customer survey gets emailed out. Now, there are different channels for doing surveys. You've got the email survey, which I just spoke to, but you also have these flash surveys. You've seen them and probably partaken in them before, where the end user is asked to stay on the phone at the conclusion of a call and punch a few buttons and answer some questions. Those flash surveys are typically, those are, offered to 100% of the callers, and the caller can make a choice as to whether or not they want to stay on the call after the incident and punch those buttons and give you a rating. But we do not recommend surveying your entire customer group. Survey a subset somewhere in the range of 1 out of 10 to 1 out of 20, and that way you can avoid over-surveying, and you're not going to create a backlash from over-surveying. From Miguel, are we able to get the audio as well? What we do, Miguel, is we record these webcasts, and then we put a link up that those who were registered for the webcast can access the link and can listen to a recording of the webcast and can share that recording with their peers if they want to do that. Okay, from Travis, how do you define ownership in the response to what you just said? Ticket ownership means that the ultimate responsibility for meeting service levels and closing a ticket and ensuring customer satisfaction is the responsibility of the level 1 service desk. That's what ownership means. So that's where the buck stops. In other words, if a ticket falls in the cracks, if there's poor customer satisfaction, what have you, the buck stops at the service desk. Now, that doesn't mean that they were necessarily responsible. If a ticket falls in the cracks, someone else, may have been responsible, and that may have been a breach of an operating level agreement, an internal service level agreement between different levels of support. And if there's poor customer satisfaction, it may be because of something that happened outside of level 1. But there's got to be a point at which the buck stops, and it generally does stop with the level 1 service desk. So when I talk about ownership, what I mean is that the service desk owns the ticket from beginning to end, and they are responsible for, if not correcting issues that happen when a ticket gets escalated or transferred someplace else, they at least need to raise the issue and make sure that those sort of service level breaches do not become a common occurrence. Okay, a question from Henrik. Related to ticket ownership, what's your opinion on second and third level contacting the end user to reduce friction loss and reduce the bottleneck? That should be done, Henrik. What you don't want is, say, a second or third level person saying, no, we don't have all the information we need. They send it back to the level 1 service desk, and then the level 1 service desk gets back to the user. That's very inefficient. The other end levels beyond level 1 have to have the opportunity to speak directly with the person who has the issue that initiated the ticket, because it's just too inefficient. You're not going to be able to resolve problems in a timely fashion. So in terms of second and third level, even if they don't own the ticket, getting in touch with the end user, absolutely, you have to do that. Okay, that was the last question. So if there are others, I'll wait for a few seconds here. If you have any other questions, please type them in the dialog box, and I'd be happy to answer those for you. If not, I just want to thank everybody once again for joining us on our webcast today. I do hope that you found it to be informative and insightful. Once again, remember that a breach survey should pop up or will pop up when you exit the webcast. Please fill it out. We value that feedback, and in return for that, we'll go ahead and send you a copy of today's webcast. Thank you very much, everybody. Goodbye now, and Happy New Year to all of you.